Hey everyone, it is Jamie Joe right here, and I'm really excited today because we have with us Susie Finkbeiner, who is a really good friend of mine and a beautiful soul and a beautiful heart. And I'm really excited for you all to be introduced to her. But before I go any further and just talk your ear off, hi Susie, welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
I am so glad to have you. And you've written quite a few books, and we're here to talk about your new release, The All American, which is in blazing red. If you're not watching this on YouTube and you're listening on a podcast, it's literally an all red cover, which is probably my favorite color. I think this is perhaps the best cover of 2023, and I'm not kidding when I say that.
Oh, I will have to tell Laura, the designer.
Do do, and then tell her not to tell my designer because they might rub shoulders now and then. But this cover is killer red.
So red.
Like when this cover came out, I was staring seriously. Okay. I was staring at this cover for a really long time because I like to do graphic arts on the side. And I'm looking at how you have one shade of red, but yet you still have a very defined character on the front, and it doesn't all blend in and look like just a mush of red.
I have no idea. My brain doesn't work that way. So for me, I it just blows my mind
Yeah.
how a designer comes up with that concept. And my friend Alexis said that it looks like a Netflix movie poster.
Yes.
And I was like, oh,
She is so right. It
yeah.
does. Netflix, if you're listening, hashtag Netflix at Netflix, make this into a movie because this book is going to be awesome. Like, I mean, let's be honest here. It's not out when we're recording this. Like, this will post the day of your release, but we're recording this earlier. And I haven't read it yet, but I know it's going to be one of my favorites because
Thank you.
Susie Pinkbinder is one of my favorites. I'm not crying. I'm
Oh,
really not. No, no. But okay, so Susie,
yes.
tell us a little bit about this book, about yourself. Help us get to know you because I know you, but my readers may not know you as well as I do.
Well, this book, The All American, is set in 1952 Michigan. And most
Mhm.
of my books are set in Michigan because it's my home state
Right.
and I adore it here. And it's interesting because the way that I got the idea for this book is that I was listening to an audiobook called The Good American Family by David Marinus. And it's about how in 1952, his dad was accused of being a communist in the Detroit Communist Party.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I was reading this kind of cartoony, fun book about the All American Girls Professional Baseball League by Annika Arak. And then I realized that the timelines matched,
Oh,
like
wow.
for the Red Scare and the women's baseball. And I was like, what's more American than baseball? And what's
Right.
less American than communism?
Right.
Smack together. So I was a student athlete and I benefited from the women that played baseball because their years playing made it possible for me to play sports.
Right.
And so it was just so much fun to research all of these ladies playing baseball and their stories. They were so fun and so spunky. And these women just then, after they were done playing, they went home and were normal. And some of their families didn't know that they played professional baseball until they were in their attics going through boxes and they were like, what's
What?
form?
For
Yes.
real?
Yes,
So they were like undercover professional baseball players.
sort of.
I
And they were like,
love it.
I didn't think anybody would be interested.
I think that's awesome.
It's adorable. And so they're like, so I was like, Mom, no wonder you could throw things.
Well, that's so cool though, because in a way, well, it's cool and it's sad in a way to think that at that time period, you almost had to be secretive about your love of athleticism as a female because
Mhm.
you were crossing into the world of men. And now we look at it and it's so great because, like you said, they literally paved the way for women's sports.
Yeah. And most of these women, after some of them didn't keep it a secret,
Okay.
but they advocated for female athletics when the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League ended. They were pushing schools to have sports teams, not just women's athletic clubs.
Mm-hmm.
And they were proving that women can play basketball on a full court because it doesn't disturb their reproductive organs to run. Because they actually thought that.
For real?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh.
And that sweating was just so bad for women's pores.
Oh my gosh, I have so many comments I won't say.
I know, right? So that they were pushing for legislation. They were pushing for schools to include girls in sports. And I'm just so grateful. And so a few of them that are still alive, they still are pushing for equality in sports for females. And it's just so much fun that they still have a passion for that.
That is really cool.
I know, they're adorable.
Really cool.
Yeah. And then so it was fun to do that research, and it was heartbreaking to do the other side of the research about people whose lives were upended because there were these accusations about them that weren't true. It was a crazy time. And I think so often we look at the 50s and we're like, it was so cute and adorable and everything was great. And it wasn't. It wasn't. There were a lot of problems. And I think that that's my tension in writing historical fiction, is not to be like, wasn't it so great then? It was great for some people, but not for others. And so, yeah.
Right.
Researching this book taught me so much. And it was such a delight and a heartbreak at the same time.
Yeah. So do you have like a main story thread that's going through the book? Do you have like a main heroine who's a baseball player and somehow gets involved in communism, or where are we going with this?
Yeah. So Bertha, the story is told from 2 points of view. So Bertha and Flossie Harding are sisters. Okay. Bertha's 16, Flossie's 11. And Bertha it starts with Bertha in home ec, and she cannot make a pie to save her life, which is
I already love her. I love her.
I don't know how to make a pie.
I couldn't make a pie.
I just like push the crust in.
I don't even push the crust in. I just put pie stuff in a plate and then sprinkle graham crackers on top and call it a crust.
Or I buy the...
Oh, there you go. That works.
But so Bertha wants to play baseball, and she plays with the guys in her neighborhood, and eventually she wants to go to tryouts for the Workington Sweet Peas, which is a fictionalized All-American Girl baseball team. And Flossie is her little sister. Flossie's kind of just a nerd. She's in love with Gilbert Blythe. She realizes that she's Amy March, and it makes her mad. And so she's awkward. She has a lot of social issues. But their father is a novelist, and he is accused. He's one that is named in the hearing by a neighbor. And so they have to relocate, and that kind of pushes Bertha into going and trying out for the Sweet Peas right then.
Okay.
So that's how it starts.
Wow. I think it's interesting when we look at history, like you were saying earlier, with the 1950s, you're coming out of post World War II. So that was a whole other dynamic. But because of that, I think our mindset as Americans now have this feeling that it was such a patriotic time within the United States. And I don't know that we're very aware of the huge Cold War that was looming.
Yes. I mean, at that time, we were even in Vietnam already.
Right.
Like trying to keep the communists contained. And it's heartbreaking to think of how a lot of the actions at that time were based off of fear.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's really what was the whole Red Scare, was that there were people who were terrifying the populace to
Mm-hmm.
say, if your neighbor is subversive, if they question the government, if they have thoughts that are different than this little box, then they're bad, and they're
Yeah.
going to corrupt your children, and these people are in the schools, these people are in the churches, these people are in your workplace. And they were really like building up this hysteria.
Yeah.
And so as I was researching and writing this, I was like, history sure does echo.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here I was reading about all of these people that were banning books then,
Mm.
as a library in my community was being shut down by some of the patrons because of
Wow.
the same things. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh boy.
Yeah, it is crazy. And history is very circular. And it's funny too, because even as you're saying that, they're trying to, in the 1950s, do away with any potential communistic influence of speaking out against the government, etc., which in and of itself is sort of communistic when you think about it. It's like, don't
It's
talk, don't say this, don't do that. It's like, wait, what? This
mm-hmm.
is That's interesting. It's an
Right.
interesting thought.
It was I think that when we are motivated by fear in
Mm-hmm.
anything, any arena of our lives,
Right.
then we're going to go to an extreme.
Yeah.
uh, it's really hard to be moderate and rational when we
Mm-hmm.
are living our lives based on what is scaring us.
Yeah.
And I think that is when we, as people who follow Christ,
Mm-hmm.
need to remember all of the times we are encouraged, don't fear, don't be
Right.
afraid, you have this security, you have this assurance, and you have all of the good promises of God that he has never gone back on.
Right.
And so I think as Christians, we really need to be that kind of leveling force of, all right, we're going to be rational here. We are
Mm-hmm.
going to be calm, and we're
Right.
going to breathe and not be noisy, but listen and try to ask the Holy Spirit to keep us sane in
Right.
this moment.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So how did do you touch on that in the All American as far as sort of the Christian response at the time in the 1950s?
Not really.
Okay.
No. There that was because the Christian response was very fearful,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Well, no, that's interesting. It's part of history, and it's something that I was curious about.
Yeah.
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 Very isolationist type
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a heroine who's interested in baseball. We have her father who's accused basically of being a communist or having communistic leanings.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So how do you play that out in a story then, as far as what's the impetus and the thrust of the story?
It's, because he's high profile,
Okay.
um, they can't just stay in their community. They have to go to a community that's not as literary minded, maybe, where they can just go be.
Mm,
And as an author, I felt very close to the father. His name is Will, and just the whole like fear of saying something wrong and having your career end. And
sure.
so it's just them relocating, and I really played off of As You Like It from Shakespeare, where they have to flee into the forest of Arden for safety, and then they realize that it's not any safer, it's
Mm,
just different.
right.
And so it was kind of like that, going into like this wooded community and realizing that there are still dangers, but we still have to. There's a really amazing speech in As You Like It where he talks about how we, even though there's a toad that's ugly, he still has this precious jewel in his head.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people think that that's like this weird, it's a whole English nerd thing. But like, if you look at a toad's eyes, they're beautiful.
Right.
So there's good there, even though toads, don't hate me, toads are kind of ugly. They're ugly cute.
They
But
are. They're not something you curl up on the couch with to watch a television show at night.
most people don't.
No.
But 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 in the speech, he even says there's good in everything, and I would not change it.
Mm.
And so there's this idea of finding the good and
Mm-hmm.
finding the things you would not change about
Right.
your life,
Right.
even though there are things you would like to change.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that transfers too into some of what we're talking about, even with life issues and the things that are going on in the world around us, and finding the good even in our differences.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yep.
know, it's one of those things where, like, you're talking about your main character afraid to speak for fear he's going to be silenced, and being sort of in the limelight. And we live in a quote cancel unquote culture where it's so much of I don't agree with you, therefore I'm going to cut toxicity out of my life,
Mm-hmm.
versus let's have some good open dialogue about why we may not agree or may not see eye to eye, so that we can not necessarily end up in agreement, but at least learn from each other.
Well, and I do think that if we were to have that kind of open conversation and reasonable conversation,
Mm-hmm.
I think that we would wind up realizing our motivations are the same.
Yes.
Motivations are to allow people to have good lives and
Mm-hmm.
to be safe and to be cared for. And if we're Christians, people to know that they are deeply loved and cherished and valuable.
Right.
Um, but we just sometimes have different ways of going about it.
Right.
We have different ways of speaking about it, of acting on it. But I really think that if we could listen, we
Mm-hmm.
would realize, oh, we're not as different as we think we are.
Right.
But it's hard to stop
It is. Yeah.
giving our opinions.
Right.
And um yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I think so much of it too is that delicate line that we walk between convictions and the fear that, what we believe is being threatened
Mhm.
or challenged, versus understanding that you can have convictions while listening and learning and discussing and talking. And I think that's where, now I'm on my soapbox here, but I feel like that's where, as a culture, back in the 1950s, where your book is taking place, and every period of history really that you look at, it's like we haven't quite learned that yet in humanity, of we can have strong convictions and yet we can listen to each other and we can discuss those and still walk away with our strong convictions,
Oh,
but
absolutely.
have relationships that are
Mhm.
stretching and, like you said, couched and coated in a love and a grace. And that's something as Christians is so critical to be able to communicate to a culture today.
I agree. Um and I think that it just, as we look through history and we see all the times that we've gotten it wrong,
Mm-hmm.
we can also see the times that God made it good anyway. Like
Right.
God fixed it for us,
Right.
and how we've grown through it. And we sure need Jesus.
Mm. Isn't that a universal truth?
And I think that the older I get, because I'm a certain age now, and I'm really proud of it. I'm 45, and
Embrace it. There
I
you
love
go.
it.
Yep.
Um, the older I get, the more okay I am with saying, I have no idea. I
Right.
don't. Um, and that doesn't destroy who I am. It doesn't diminish my intelligence. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that I have less faith than someone else. It just means that I don't know, and that's all right.
Right.
Because it's good. It's good to keep on searching and learning and trying to figure it out and admitting that I'm a worm of a girl and I need help.
We can be worms together, Susie. I relate to you in that.
Good. Let's just hope that if it rains and we end up on the sidewalk, someone picks us up and
Before the sun comes out and dries us to a crisp.
And the robins come.
Everybody who's listened to this podcast and goes outside now are going to look at all their sidewalks and be like, oh, there's Susie, there's Jamie, they're crispy.
Save them.
Save them worms. Wow. Well, this really digressed from 1952 and communism and all-American baseball, but
it always does when I'm around.
Oh, same here. I love having these kind of conversations because one, I think they're important, but two, there is so much story behind the story that authors write. And we can sit here and talk about, Bertha and Flossie and your characters. And when readers read them, they're going to learn about them. But I love getting to the heart behind the author and what they're learning in their research or their faith or the times that they're studying, especially with historical authors like yourself. And you're tackling in your books, just so readers know, you're not the typical historical time period author that likes the Gilded Age or the Regency. You've tackled some of the more current contemporary decades.
Yeah, I am very in love with mid 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
That I think that part of that is that I'm digging, trying to understand my grandparents and my parents.
Sure.
And I enjoy it because there are places I can go in my community that still look like they did.
Yeah.
And for instance, over the weekend, my kids were invited to a bowling birthday party.
Okay.
And I walked in, and this bowling alley was built in 1953, and they have preserved as much of it.
I love that.
And they've kept the cutesy, retro paint on the wall, and they've restored so much, and they've done such good work at keeping this place just, kitschy 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
And I walk into a place like that and I'm like, whoa. And then my friend Christy said, you should use this in a book. And I was like, yep, it's happening. So I'm taking pictures of it. But I feel like that history is so close when I'm looking at it in the 50s, 60s, 70s.
Right.
And people are still alive who want to talk about it.
Very much so. And who it touches really emotionally. There was and I'm really sorry because I can't remember the title, but one of the books that you wrote was set during the Vietnam era where they were getting letters from one of the soldiers that had gone over. Which book was that?
All Manner of Things.
Yes, All Manner of Things. And it was interesting because I read it and just completely devoured it from the perspective of a daughter whose father had been in the Vietnam War. And he'd been stationed overseas and has his own story, which I won't go into, but I grabbed the book and I thought, oh, my dad has to read this, right? So I gave it to my dad and I said, I think you're really going to enjoy this because I'm looking at it through the eyes of somebody who's reading about history. So my dad read your book and he calls me, he goes, why did you do that to me? And I'm like, what? And he goes, wow. He's like, it was well written. He really liked the book. But it was one of those books that he said was really hard for him to get through because I was looking at it through the eyes of somebody reading history. He was reading it through the eyes of somebody who had literally walked every step of those journeys in different ways. And it was bringing back real life memories to him.
Yeah, I've had a lot of boomer readers.
Mm-hmm.
It really, and that is more a testimony to the people who allowed me into their lives to hear their stories. Carl Rewa he lives locally and he served in Vietnam and he came back and he was not okay.
Yeah.
But the Lord helped him become okay.
Good.
He does a ministry for men who are coming back from war zones and helps them to get back to life.
Yeah.
He's amazing. And he was so open about everything.
That's
My
awesome.
my dad wrote his memoir of his time serving in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
A friend, Bruce, told me all of his experiences of being stateside during that time. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I appreciate that generation when they are eager to
Yeah.
share stories.
Right. Right. And they're all stories that we need to hear and perspectives we need to hear, because you hear like of the gentleman that you mentioned who comes back and struggles with that post-war trauma. And then you have somebody like my dad who got his papers to go to the Vietnam front lines, and at the last minute it was changed and they shipped him to Thailand, where he was in charge of shipments over to Vietnam. And ever since then, for my entire life, my dad has had survivor's guilt. I don't think he knows it. I don't think he would identify it as that. But even, when he was awarded some recompense from the government for Agent Orange and things like that, he was like, why? I didn't do I didn't do anything. And so it's those things where it's like these stories need to be told, and it's like this new generation coming up of history that to us was our parents, but to our new generations is history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think with Vietnam, it was such a touchy conversation, and it still is.
Yeah.
Um, but these guys were not honored the way that they should have been.
No.
Um, and I'm glad that they are getting that more and more.
Right.
As we are realizing they didn't have a choice. They were babies. They were babies.
Yeah.
And they were sent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's been fun. I shouldn't say fun. I use the worst words.
You're good.
But it's been good to see, even in some of the magazines my dad gets from the VA and different things like that, how the government is starting to really recognize the heroes of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Of course, there's more present day heroes too, but just in those 3 decades there with the Korean and the Vietnam Wars, and
Mm-hmm.
this whole time period that you're covering in the All American, there were so many dynamics, but it was almost the untalked about time.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Definitely silent generation type stuff going on.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Susie, you are making it not as silent in the All American. So, from the daughter of a Vietnam vet and a daughter of people who fought in World War II, and lived through the 50s and everything, um, it's appreciated.
Thank you.
It's
Thank you.
appreciated. So, keep writing. And for those of you who are readers out there, you're going to want to check out the All American. It is on shelves July 9th, 11th. Yes. And Susie has a backlist. As you can tell, we've been talking about some of her other books, All Manner of Things. And there's one with a bird on the front. See, I can remember covers. I don't remember titles.
That one is The Nature of Small Birds.
Yes, The Nature of Small Birds. And then there's more. So go check out Susie. And Susie, how do readers find you to check out you and your books?
I am a book nerd on Instagram. So just Susie_Finkbeiner, and you can see books I'm reading, silly selfies, pictures of my cat,
This is
and
perfect.
books that yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, I think our cats could be friends well, maybe
probably.
your cat would be into it. But and then they can find me on Facebook. Really, that's a really good place, or SusieFinkbeiner.com. Good luck spelling that Finkbeiner.
I was just going to say, let me see if I can do it. It's Finkbeiner.
You
Did
did
I
it.
do it right?
You did. I'm amazed.
I love it. I love it.
My maiden name was Riggs.
Okay.
And when I met Jeff Finkbeiner, I was like, he is really cute, but that name, it was like that poor girl.
And you
Mary
still adopted his name. How sweet of that was you. How sweet of that was you, because I can speak grammar really well.
Obviously, you write romance.
Oh, I do. I write so much
Pepper would
mortifying
be proud
romance.
of you. I
Yeah,
post TikTok.
yeah, Pepper Basham and I have a little bit of a gothic romantic war going on social media, but
Follow that because it's hilarious.
Well, and follow Susie because Susie is super fun to follow and she's got a great heart. And I think you all will be really blessed if you have not picked up one of her books. Do it. I have commanded thee, go forth and buy. Thank you so much, Susie, for being on Madlit Musings. I really am glad that you were here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such a great space, and I've been encouraged by the other authors I've listened to on here.
Awesome. Well, we'll have you back.
Thanks.